Well, let's begin. Welcome to everybody. My name is Jeff Gedman. I'm president of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, which is, as we just discussed, a congressionally funded media group, multimedia company that broadcasts to countries that either do not have free media or transition countries in which free and independent media is not yet fully established. During the Cold War, we concentrated on the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe. Today, it's the Middle East. It is Afghanistan, it's Pakistan, it's Russia and Russia's neighborhood still to some extent. It's my pleasure to welcome you and a very distinguished guest, the President of Georgia. If you have not experienced him yet, you're in for a treat because he is a dynamo. In 2003, in November, in the Republic of Georgia, there was a revolution known as the Rose Revolution. It came about driven principally by deep concern over flawed parliamentary elections and equally deep concern over the state of the economy and corruption. And tens of thousands of people flooded the streets asking for decent, accountable government and demanding changes. And they turned to a 35-year-old US-educated firebrand named Mikheil Saakashvili, and they turned to him with greatest enthusiasm, chanting Misha, Misha, as he's known by nickname. In less than a decade, President Saakashvili has achieved a great amount, and in particular, in the area of economic reform. A country that he inherited, which I think you described as a failed state, has become a revitalized, modernizing democratic state with challenges still. We're going to hear about that because you inherited a very difficult task. Welcome to all of you. Welcome to you, President Saakashvili. What we're going to propose is giving you the floor for an initial presentation. Then we'll have a discussion up here and then involve the audience. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks a lot for this. Thank you for this, a firebrand is the list of the things, epithets I usually get. Usually I get like turbulent, tumultuous, troubled, whatever, like, etc. So, hothead, etc. But actually, you know, we are used to it because Georgia has been changing with pace that was pretty remarkable. I think it was a failed state like 6, 7 years ago, as you described. Just the government could not perform the basic functions. There was no number to call for police or for, in case of emergency, for an ambulance. No roads were built. Nobody was paid salaries. People were cynical about the institutions. According to every poll, corruption was endemic. It was way of life. And I mean, we were going to hell. Actually, yes, it was a failed state by all credentials, and so ultimately we had to go through very difficult transformation, and we had to move fast. The transformation, this Rose Revolution, is depicted here. You see the results now, but basically we went through a very important set of first reforms, and you know, today I'm here to present the Liberty Act, which we are just enacting as part of our Constitution, with its fundamental principles. And the fundamental principles of our new Liberty Act is liberty manifested in limited government, few and low and flat taxes, the freedom from state interference and bureaucratic direction, opportunity for all, afforded by economic liberty and clean governance, whereby afford social mobility through affordable education, hard work, and playing by the rules is realistic aspiration for our citizens. Dignity, whereby means-tested, focused state assistance is available for those who really need it. And so these are the three basic things. And why did we do it, Liberty Act, now, and why? What's the timing for, you know, this period of our history? I mean, the point here is that obviously we had to go through very difficult reforms, and GDP growth rates of 8.5% or higher from 2005 to 2008. We had couple of years, despite crisis and the other problems that we've encountered, that we had double-digit growth. Again, this year, hopefully, we are back to 6% growth. Maybe some people would say 7% growth. And growth was fueled by increasing availability of credit and large foreign private capital flows. The assets of the banking sector increased 900%. Private capital inflows reached 24% of GDP. And it's a very diversified foreign FDI, also very diversified from all kinds of different directions. Tax revenues basically grew, considering that we decreased taxes by 60%. And then there was, with the first 3 years, net increase of 400%. And actually, later again, we have increased. This year again, we have increased. Basically, overall, I would say 12, 14 times, if you consider the number of decreased taxes. The efficiency of public agencies has improved dramatically with consumer experience, and those basically either equal or superior to those known in the United States and the, say, UK. Maybe superior to most of the European countries. And living standards have also improved dramatically, and I think middle class has more or less emerged. The poverty has been reduced from 52% down to 22%, and of course it's still high. But I mean, but you get now another kind of poverty when you get coverage for health insurance, as well as other basic coverage for the people that also poverty assistance to each member of that society. So basically at this stage we have 4 key taxes that remain: VAT of 18%. Flat corporate profit tax of 15%, flat personal income tax of 20%, that is to be decreased to 15% within the next 2 years, and the property tax of 1%. So we also have excise tax for gasoline, tobacco, and alcohol. And the tax rate on dividend and interest income has been reduced to 5%, and further will be reduced to 0 by 2012. We do not have payroll, social insurance, inheritance, capital gains, wealth tax, or a stamp duty. As foreign source income is taxed of 0% for individuals. And Georgia in 2009 has been, by Forbes, the Forbes tax misery index and the reform index. We were number 4 in the world, only behind Qatar, UAE, and Hong Kong. And as a result, budget revenue has only increased after we have decreased taxes. We have full convertibility of currency with no currency or capital controls. We have refrained from imposing any currency of capital controls or limited on bank deposit withdrawals when we had this, when everybody was introducing it actually all around us. And we have very few. We are one of very few countries that has no basically bank deposit insurance arrangements whatsoever. And however, I have to say that within 3 months after Russian invasion in 2008, the bank deposits returned to basically pre-war numbers, and what we have also that that basically the deposits since then have doubled, and that's also shows what's the confidence in banking sector, and that overall it has been very stable for all this period, crisis as well as invasion. We have undertaken huge public sector reform. We've downsized 90% of all licenses and permits requirement, but also 50% of employees in public sector have been reduced. We have also a case when we basically had to fire 90% of police force in 2004, but it's also true that it was the most spectacular one, but there were also other reforms like basically downsizing the 90% of most of the regulations and regulatory agencies. And so as a result, lots of things are very easy in Georgia. For instance, in terms of paperwork for exports and imports, the typical time of processing has been reduced from several days or several weeks, basically, to several hours. As a result, foreign trade turnover has quintupled since 2003, basically, if you consider today's figures. Georgia was ranked by the World Bank as the 5th easiest country in which to employ workers. And so all of this is very important because basically there is a democratic consensus in Georgia that we should embrace free enterprise. Nobody questions this. And overall, if you look at credentials of Georgia, when you look at freest economies in the world, we have Anglo-Saxon League basically. It's as you see, it's first of all, they're #1 is Singapore. Then you have Hong Kong. Then I believe it's Australia. Then USA. Then we have UK. Then we have New Zealand. Then we have I think Sweden, Canada, Switzerland, Denmark, Norway. Then Georgia. After Georgia, we have Finland, we have Iceland, we have Germany is I think 20 something at that list. France is I think below 30, but it's lower down the figure. And then you see the closest Eastern European country that comes to us is basically Estonia, 24th, and so forth, so on. I mean, Russia is 120th, Ukraine 142nd. Now we used to be 137. We were when we started reforms in 2004, and when these ratings were made. Now, I think this is an important figure, but I think even more important is the fact that on corruption issues, Transparency International ranks Georgia as world's #1 investor, the #1 fighter with corruption. It's no country has moved in 5 years period as much up as Georgia. We moved 77 or 78 positions up. So incidentally, for instance, like Russia has moved the same time, 77 or 78 positions down. So we met in the middle. I don't remember them saying hello to us, but anyway. But that's what had happened. But also there was a company survey done by EBRD last year, and Georgia was ranked as Europe's third least corrupt economy. It was based on company surveys. Now that's what companies are saying, but even more important is what citizens are saying. And what citizens are saying is that in 98% of Georgians in 4 years ago, basically 5 years ago, were saying in Gallup polls and basically consistently more or less the other polls that they've encountered corruption firsthand. Now it's less than 1%, basically 0.5%. According to the last poll I've seen, basically it has disappeared from public radio perception as a problem. And that's very, very significant. Obviously, it's very much against everything that's going on in that region. So what we say this Liberty Act all about is very simple. I think it's we want to make part of Constitution our liberal changes. That's to say that taxes cannot be increased but through referendum. No new regulations and regulatory agencies can be introduced but through referendum. The spending should not be more than 30% of GDP. Then government cannot own any state banks and basically share in banks. Well, we don't own them anyway, but precluding them for the future. I think at this stage we are spending something like 33 and 34% of GDP, so we should bring it down under 30. This is more or less what we want to put in Economic Liberty Act, and of course it also has this budget deficit to be kept at 3%. And government debt also to be capped. And so this will be a part of Constitution that I think will provide for more responsible government for the decades to come, not just for, not just as a result of the previous years. This is basically more or less what I had to say, and whatever questions you might have, I'm willing to answer.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. That's a fine start. I'm going to begin, if I may, and ask you to say a little bit more. You mentioned this at the top of your presentation about the context and what you inherited. It seems to me that we Americans and we in the West in the last 20 years underestimated the damage that was done by communism, not only to economies and infrastructure, but also to mental infrastructure. It changed habits and values and behaviors. So you inherited a country that was poor and weak economically, but also mentally. What did you find, and what were the 2 or 3 principal challenges you faced in 2003?
I think that's exactly the main thing. I think the biggest thing that all these figures don't exactly capture, but they reflect as well, is a deep social and mental transformation. Because we moved, this was a society, Soviet society, and I think it's still very much the case all over that region, unfortunately. But the Soviet Union has been formally dissolved, although there are frantic attempts to bring it back. We have 20% of our territory occupied where this process is being implemented right now. But actually, the way it was structured, it wasn't only that every pipeline would go only through Russia or every telephone line would go through Russia. That's to say, if we have to call neighboring Azerbaijan, it's first picked up somewhere in Novorossiysk. They go through it, all the relevant services, what if they like something, and then they basically send it back to Azerbaijan or to Turkey, indeed, which are like our southern neighbor. But also, like hydropower stations that were built, that switch would be in Russia, and turbines in another republic, etc. So it was not meant to this all. The way how enterprise were structured. They would put still enterprise in the thing where there were no raw materials, and vice versa. People would supply details to each other from like 3,000 miles distance, because basically it wasn't economically made no sense, but it made sense politically. But besides it, I think the main safeguards, main protection for what was the Soviet Union was mentality. It was in the head of the people, the way they were. And I think this was fact that it was a mediocrity, basically in terms that mediocre people succeeded and they brushed away all the talents. It was society where basically people were not used to taking independent decisions. Society where lying was an instrument of communication, and it's a big thing, but it's just part of culture, hypocrisy and lying, double speak, double think. And I think if with anything we had to battle, even today, that's exactly this, basically using lying as the instrument of communication. It's like nothing. And so obviously also attitude towards the state, and it was even double-fold problem for countries like Georgia, because what happened that in Russia they didn't like the state because it was inherently violent and abusive and basically kind of hostile towards the people. But for countries that felt themselves as occupied, it was double thing. It was foreign state and it was bad state. So from that point of view, people didn't like any state. Even the least abusive one. So even if we have a small government, things very often our opponents, and we didn't send people to labor camps. We fired 50,000 bureaucrats only, or basically not 50, 100,000 bureaucrats together with police force and other law enforcement in the capital. This is 8% of the population. They all live in downtown Tbilisi. Most of them, if there is some rally against the government, show up and very willingly. And that's perception that government is unstable. It's not meant unstable. It's normal that these people show up. Last year they blocked us from government premises for a few months. But overall, I think even those people have understood gradually that they have to move on. Things have to change. But I think where the real meritocracy thing has changed, that we introduced meritocracy. That's to say, to get to the state-funded institution of education. If we look at the results, mostly these are people from rural areas. Before, if you lived across the street, your grandfather went there, you went there. This was all based on kind of closed clan system, and then now it's open. Advancing current position, it's open to everybody, and especially for business, obviously. And this is the point, that in business, people who are better, they advance, and that's moving to meritocracy, moving away from what we had, and towards attitude of the states as well. People, when, as I mentioned, people rallying against us, they were usually saying, "Oh, we are against government violence." But if you had listened carefully what they mean by violence, they meant that police enforces a minimum rules, and we have 3 times less crime rate than Russia. We used to be the most criminalized part, without exaggeration, of the former Soviet Union. What they mean by we have low taxes, but when they have to pay taxes, they think that it's an abuse of government. Any people say that, but I think Georgians have least of the reasons to complain about it, if not maybe UAE citizens have less reasons, but I mean for all the different economic basis. So actually, I mean, people have to get used that state is necessary evil anyways, but we have to make sure that state is very small. I mean, George Washington said it very clearly. State is a firebrand, and it's like you should controls the government like you should control fire. You should be very careful. It's useful, but you should control it. And I would be the first one to say that government is a bad instrument in many respects. It's obvious. People are asking me, why do you have to introduce this now? Don't we trust our future governments from now? Why does it have to be part of Constitution? I don't trust any government, including government of my own, when it comes to to instruments like if they can utilize. There's always temptation to overplay it, and so you need these limits. But on the other hand, you need limits, but secondly, clear field of rules. And when we talk about libertarian approach towards economy, for that you need plain kind of field from within which you enforce that. But it is of course a social transformation. It's a mental transformation. And I think biggest part of it is that I'm basically de facto, maybe with very few exceptions, the oldest member of my government. People I had no experience of working under Soviet Union. I was a student when it disintegrated. We have ministers. We have, head of Georgian police force is here. She became head of police force when she was 28, and the American education, 30,000 people strong force. But also we have ministers that don't even remember what Soviet Union looked like. We have MPs like this. So also political class. This is the only former Soviet countries, even ahead of the Balts, that managed to totally move away from Soviet model. And as a result, if you come to visuals to Georgia now, for instance, I think Georgia, by the end of this year, more or less, more main urban centers will never look like there was ever Soviet Union. I think in 3-4 years' time, it will even not look like it was Eastern and Central Europe. Not that I have something against them. We are the same region, but it's moving with a speed which is amazing. Also in terms of visuals, in terms of people's behavior, body language, you can feel it. I've been president and I know it. Even if you're a president, but you were before, if you go into some country, come out in the street, you can see whether you can sense, especially if you're coming from a background of dictatorship, whether that country is free or it's authoritarian.
Tell us, if you would, same subject, if we can stay with that for a moment, something about culture and how Georgians tick, and I'll tell you how I mean that. I remember in the late 1980s being in communist Poland, meeting with a young member of Solidarity. And he told me that the communist authorities had just raided their headquarters and confiscated their printing presses. And I said, gosh, that sounds terrible. And he said, well, it is, but it's insured, our printing presses. I said, it's insured. And he said, well, every good and service you can get here on the shadow economy. And that spoke to a particular Polish inventiveness and entrepreneurship. You wouldn't have experienced that kind of story in 1988 in East Germany, because East Germany, communist East Germany was not communist Poland, and if I may say, to stretch it a bit, Germany is not Poland. You've talked already, Mr. President, about your attitude toward the state and government. In a country and culture like Germany, we Americans call government Uncle Sam. Germans call government Vaterstaat, the father state. It reflects a very different kind of relationship. So to Georgia specifically, we know how you tick. You like limited government, you like entrepreneurship, you embrace risk, you endeavor to pursue innovation. But how does the Georgian people tick? Are they more East German or are they more Polish?
They're more Polish, yeah, definitely. But no, I mean, we don't. Some of the stereotypes that basically we had were defied, because in many ways, in terms of order, in terms of enforcing things, in terms of discipline, I think we were very much like southern Italy. We were very much like Palermo. I think we started to look more like at least northern Italy, or I think more in some ways like Germany, modern Germany. But this has been difficult cultural change. But it happened, and it happened because I don't think there are cultures inherently prone to be. There are more people that are more. I don't think it's anthropology. I mean, that's to say. I think the way of life shapes lots of things, and and I think nobody believed that Georgia could ever defeat corruption. I still don't believe we defeated it. It can come back any moment. It's like cancer, but but it's checked. It's in remission. It has gone. It's no longer in the organism, and that's basically nobody thought we could defeat organized crime. Organized crime, 80% of organized crime bosses in Russia are from Georgia by their origin. Now Russia introduced full-blown embargo on our energy exports, and then on our, basically on our all exports, and we on energy exports to Georgia, basically because we imported 80% of electricity. Now we refurbish the sector, and now the only two products we export to Russia is electricity and organized crime bosses. Because culturally they are, they are acceptable there. I mean, and then in Georgia there is no place for this. So, and when I grew up in the street, they were the role models. So it was, everybody thought it was part of culture. Everybody thought corruption is part of culture. It's gone. It's gone like this. It's not. You don't need to have political will to do it, and we've done it.
Let me ask you about the politics of economic reform. And this panel, this discussion is supposed to be about Georgia, sure, but lessons for developing and transitional countries. And it seems to me a leader like you has faced a real dilemma. Because what you have to do, or what you've done, is some deep, radical economic surgery. And I think all the best and brightest economists would cheer you and say, exactly right. But you're a democratically elected leader. You rule by consent. You will do things, will you not, in the short term, and have done, including in firing and restructuring, that put a lot of people out of work, sure, that risk populism and backlash. And if you don't get the balance right, you may have all the right economic ideas and you lose, other forces take over, and everything is set back.
No, you're totally right. I mean, but I mean, it's all about cycles, and I had enough time to, we in Georgia we have also another distinction which people are not aware of, and I think even inside Georgia they don't realize it. But we have the highest per capita number of amusement parks worldwide. I've been a very great fan of amusement parks, and the greatest thing I liked about amusement parks is roller coasters, because that's the only thing. I grew up in Soviet Union. Soviet amusement parks had everything but roller coaster. But that's politics, like roller coaster. And what you get is you have ups and downs, and it's not. But it's time to get even and level up even and go up right at the right moment. And the right moment is elections. And so what happens is that I was elected with like universal consensus. Basically, I had no alternative at that moment. Then we did all this painful reform. Then some people got very disenchanted. Some people got very angry. Then we said, then basically they marched against us. Then we said, okay, we call for early elections. We want another mandate for reforms. And they voted. I escaped narrowly. I did 54%, but then, I mean, for our standards, it's narrow. But then at parliament elections, we had 74 months from now. Then. Why? Because people came back with their confidence. Basically they put confidence. But it's like this popularity is like currency that you spend. It's like money. You have asset. But it's capital to get invested. It's not like I've seen lots of politicians, that look at every day at opinion polls like some beauty would look into mirror and say, if poll is down 2%, they are already, panicking, and this is bad. I mean, because then these people are not capable of changing their societies. We should be aware that societies need to be changed, and societies always never have 100% consent. They should have at least consent of considerable part. That's important, and so you should constantly campaign for reforms. There is no such thing that every reform is inherently unpopular. This is not right. It's popular with some people. It should be popular at least with some significant part of society to succeed. There is no other way to succeed. But once you explain to them, you should always be ready that the other part doesn't accept it. But the point here is you get this capital, you invest it in the reforms, and by the time of next elections, you basically get back the confidence. Yeah. If you fail, then it failed. That's the thing. That's the thing with democracy. Then you just, your roller coaster gets off the rail, and then somebody else would do it. But so far, we've been successful. And we have last year, say we have local elections now, which are important for Georgia. I think if we had held them, around this time last year, we would have had problems. If we look at polls now, and therefore for like 4 weeks from now, we have no problems. I mean, we leveled up, and the point here is, and by the way, I mean, the demand last year was to do them earlier. We did it earlier, but just in time to get enough support. So what I'm saying is that, you know, of course, democracy has all this, you know, impediments. On the other hand, this is the only way how you develop societies, because you should bring up best out from people. Societies, how do they? Why is an innovation happening in only the most advanced democracies? I mean, that's the reality. It is happening only in advanced democracies, because the democracy brings out best from the people. You know, we have successful economies in more or less authoritarian countries, but we don't have much of innovation, and innovation moves the world. And so, from that point of view, we are looking forward to the moment in, you know, like small Estonia, 1 million people, 1,200,000. They've invented Skype. I don't want to name countries, but you know, there are way bigger countries that haven't invented anything like this. Estonia is, I think, the most advanced democratic model in the former Soviet states. We want to get there, and you know, we'll get there.
Okay. So China and Singapore are not models for you for economic development.
No, I would say Singapore is interesting from other point of view for us. I mean, China is not comparable, but Singapore is because Singapore has benefited from the fact that, you know, from little bureaucracy, fast-track government, you know, lower taxes, and you know, because they've been next to this huge, gigantic China with which they had bad relations. I mean, not only Mao Zedong, but you know, Deng Xiaoping had very bad relations with Lee Kuan Yew. But what happened? But China, of course, didn't overrun them like our neighbor tried. Somehow they were smarter even then. But the point here is that you know, the way how Singapore benefited was very clear. That, you know, we are next to all these oil and gas-rich countries of Central Asia, Caspian, and all around us. We don't have the amount of the natural, even closer to what they have, but we have something they don't have. A transparent, small government, no corruption, lower taxes, the very low crime rate, a safe country to be in, and we have huge cultural domination in that region because there are more, you know, Georgian arts, music, everything. It's very well known in that region. There are more Georgian restaurants in Kiev and Moscow than, you know, French, Italian, Chinese, and other ethnic cuisines together, and this is a factor. So there is this presence. So we are different in some ways. You know, we have elements of what Switzerland has for Europe. On the other hand, we have you know, some of the benefits that Singapore has in that part of the world. Yes, in some ways you model it after, you know, the way how Dubai started, the way how Singapore is. You shouldn't overplay it, of course, like Dubai, but you know, they were too you know, but they were too much supported by all this oil money. It was, and I think it's damaged. But ultimately, of course, it's democracy is a very big factor here, because that, you know, that's you need to bring out this creative energy from people. And I think I mean, if you compare, I have great esteem for Singapore, but if you compare Singapore with Israel, which is much more chaotic, much more, you know, in many ways, like difficult society, but with way more innovation. And I think the key there is democracy. It's not anthropology.
Well, now Israel has as a robust political democracy, but socialistic impulses in the economy.
Yeah, but I think for what innovation Israel brings, and have brought lots of innovation, I think that's all accounts for democracy. Basically, that's the main result.
We need to go to the audience, but I have to ask one last question before I give up my principal time here. We've talked about Georgia, we've talked about economic reform, we've talked about building political democracy, and there's one word that you haven't mentioned, and it begins with the letter R.
Yeah, well, that's our habit not to mention that. No, we usually try to think positively, you know.
Well, I'm going to ask you a negative question. You were invaded nearly 2 years ago, I think in August. Part of your territory is being occupied. It has to have some impact. What have been the costs of war and occupation?
I mean, huge, but on the other hand, huge in terms of human toll, tragedy. We have 500,000 people expelled from their houses. I would say the most educated part of our Georgian society, those ethnic Jews, Greeks, Georgians, Ukrainians, Estonians that have been expelled from Abkhazia, or all 400,000 people, were the most educated, the most middle-class part of our society, and that's tragic. But On the other hand, we basically it gave us lots of resilience because we came back. We're a comeback kid story, and Georgian economy is growing now at higher pace than our world economy. In many ways, there were two models, basically more or less acceptable in former Soviet states. Yeltsin type of chaotic democracy, so-called. And basically, you had this, you could say just anything. The elections were more or less free, but then basically everything else was not there. Or Putin type of stability, where you had this, perception of at least now things are moving up, and but basically things were moving up with the price of oil, what Putin did, he capitalized on democratic gains that Yeltsin did, but then he was lucky with price of oil. But then, because the things were, the screws were tightened, now what you see, and there are also, I know, Russian participants here in this conference, and they'll be, you can ask them, or at least behind the door, so they'll be willing to tell it to you. The problem is that the whole thing is disintegrating again. Again, there are street killings. Again, there is, total inefficiency at every level, because the capital they had from Yeltsin they spent. And with all money, there is certain limit. Yeah, of course, if it gets to $300, they might be. But the point is that when you have certain level of corruption, certain level of management, then after that nothing helps anymore. And so, and then I think Georgia has created third model, and which is normal model, normalcy, imperfect but democracy. Freedom of speech looks chaotic, but ultimately pretty stable. I've seen how our not only our nation performed, but also our bureaucracy under Russian bombs. I've seen policemen regulating with smile movement of very jammed main roads which were bombed with smile on their face. I've seen people demonstrating and making a life chain all around the country. 1 million people out of the country of 4.8 million people. Amazing. It wouldn't have been possible 5-6 years ago to make a life chain. And so, people get organized, people get ownership of their own country, and people also get sense of urgency that things should be done. And that also gave, in a way, strange way, more resilience. As I said, we had full energy embargo. It woke us up. We now export electricity. We doubled our hydropower production because of restructuring of the sector. We are now doubling it again within the next 5 years due to new investments. We had we've lost 80%, 70% of our market more or less with the Russian embargo. We diversified, and basically it was blessing in disguise, that embargo, because basically I told, by the way, Vladimir Putin once in 2006 actually, that we'll enact you a statue as a founder of modern Georgian economy. He thought that he decided it was a bad joke, but it was not. I meant it. Look, people, not only we started to export things like jets, business jets, or, other things, and we found small niches in the market, but this is we have now growth exports like 60% for the first 4 months of this year. But the point here is, even like traditional products like Georgian wine, I pray to God, because now Russia, I heard, is offering to bring back our products to their markets, because Belarus and actually Kazakhstan refused to introduce the embargo, and now they have customs union. But the point here is, I don't want, I'm dreading the moment when Georgian wines will get back to Russian market, because quality will again go down. Because since last 2-3 years, quality has dramatically increased. Better, way better, because you can no longer dump just anything to that one big market. So, and this is just one small example of what this thing. And finally, we had war. Everything else was exhausted, and the war was obviously meant to change our way of life, to topple the government. It didn't succeed. It made Georgian economy more resilient. So that tells you the story. That tells you the story of amazing, and that tells you also not only to us, to our people, or to you, but it tells to a whole region. That's why you hear all this, basically, other countries very careful looking at Georgian example. And they also know that Georgia came under biggest pressure of all of them. And basically, it withstood it because we did the reforms. Who couldn't withstand it? Those who didn't do the reforms. So the key, and those who are less democratic, that were less open. So the lesson there is, best protection is make your reforms, advance, go against, time is working against you, you should go fast, and then maybe it will protect you.
Thank you. Now, dear audience, over to you. And if you would tell us who you are. This gentleman here, and I think someone will bring a microphone to you, and we'll come over here as well, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm intrigued as well as...
Sorry, would you tell us who you are?
Excuse me, Randy Garcia from
Thank
the
you.
Investment Council Company.
Thanks.
I'm impressed and intrigued with the progress and success you've made regarding organized crime in Georgia, being from Las Vegas especially. Could you please provide comment, if you will, on the state as well as strategy on the war on drugs in Georgia in compare and or in contrast to the United States, please?
Well, we are trying to, there was, going back to Las Vegas, I remember a few years ago, very good British journalist compared our government to Ocean 11. And he was looking at, like these are like a bunch of good-looking young guys, and basically everything seems possible, and they do things fast. We are also, by the way, in the process of doing our own Las Vegas. I don't know whether it will make you happy in the town of Batumi. Within 3 hours of flying distance, there is no gambling in the region. And we have this town of Batumi, which is now, which was a town of 120,000 people. I think the population is going to quadruple within the next 5-6 years or so. But basically, it's the only tropical part of the Black Sea. And now it's the process of construction, of course, all with private investment, of more 5-star hotels than the city of Moscow, and that tells you the story. And I saw the other day on CNN International Jim Clancy, who was a good anchorman, serious journalist, and he was there. He covered the place, and then in the end, he said something very perplexing for me and very unusual. He said, "I've been all around the world. I've seen things. This is by far the biggest miracle I've personally seen anywhere." Wow. And so that's quite, but on the organized crime, I mean, we were, as I said, like Palermo to Soviet Union and former Eastern Europe. When I became president, the head of Georgian mafia was owning half of our businesses, basically controlling in some of the other way. He would mostly live, abroad, but basically come in and be met at the airport with escort by Minister of Interior, escorted to, see all kind of ministers, presidential relatives, and sometimes the president himself. When we took over for a while, he went to Barcelona, where he owned the whole district next to Barcelona, where he had his so-called legal construction company. And basically then Spanish police asked for help. We provide them with some information. But of course he had informant in Spanish police, so he was informed in due time, and he was extradited. He fled to Russia, where he drove around with the FSB protection until the moment when he was implicating killing the head of local Russian mafia in front of Putin's windows in the center of Moscow, like 100 meters in front of his windows. And then he had to be arrested. And then now he's extradited back to Spain because Russia didn't want to have him, and Spain doesn't know what to do with him. That is to say the story where we are. But as I said, 80% of crime bosses in Russia, in Ukraine, indeed happen to be from Georgia. But in Georgia we had the RICO law, basically saying that if you are implicated to be organized crime boss, you go to prison. And the way, and it's interesting because there was this code of honor of former thieves in law, that's to say mafia bosses. Then if you are asked, are you a thief, he should say yes. And they had to convene a congress in Sochi, or conference or whatever they called it, to change the rules. So that they could lie, and they could say, no, we are not, but then you can find other witnesses who would say they are organized crime bosses. So lots of them were sent to prison. But with drugs, it's the most difficult case, because obviously we are on the route of main drugs from Afghanistan to many areas. But for the first time since the last 2 years, the whole drug thing has been going down. But as a result, we have 6,000 people in a country, as I said, of less than 5 million people. I think 6,000 or 8,000 jailed for drug trafficking, it's a huge number. Basically, almost half of prison population. As we said, we have no longer contract killings. We used to have a lot like 5-6 years ago. No one, not a single one. We don't have any more the kidnappings. So there were a couple of attempted cases, but stick crime has disappeared almost entirely. Like people don't lock cars. When I became president, they used to steal like sometimes 50, 60 cars a day. This has disappeared as a crime. So and it's all interconnected. They all feed each other. And the most difficult homicide rate has gone down. I think overall crime has decreased 3 times. I think the most difficult case still is drug thing. But even there, since last 2 or 3 years, we have steady decrease. So all this came the last. But of course, this is not the least. This is very important. With organized crime bosses, they were directing drug trafficking, kidnappings, killings, and stealings from prison. So prison service was a big problem. I was a minister of justice, and even then we have to say that we couldn't do much about the fact that they controlled prison system inside. The way how it was from Soviet times, that prison director would basically nominate somebody from criminals who would be a real director, who would make the order for him, and basically also give some payment to him, so that basically government couldn't pay him salary, and so they would do all this kind of or directing crime from there. We started to crack down. We had the head of prisons appointed, and this was more difficult than police reform. I did it 1 year after I became to power. Police was earlier. And I appointed a 26-year-old guy who basically was very brave, and he basically localized these guys. And then they told him, "We'll make a riot and you'll have problems." He said, "Fine." And so we had 24,000 prison population. There was universal riot everywhere. Basically, they suddenly had lots of firearms and other things. We had to use force. Lots of people were killed. But as a result, and we had 2 or 3 others attempted, as a result, they are all neutralized in a way, because we built new prisons. The telephones are jammed. They are of European standard, much more comfortable. They are fed much better. I mean, they are fed before they had to be fed by their relatives, and they are fed as well as Georgia soldiers almost. Their soldiers are fed very well in Georgia, so we spend lots of money on that. They also get lots of things like we have holidays now for them, for those for good behavior, lots of reductions for transfer. So it's in a way both ways. It went carrots and sticks. But the biggest change was there that these guys sit in special cells. Each of them has individual cells, and they have to clean it themselves. And that's unheard of, because they were supposed to have slaves and everything. And then now they are the worst off in prison system. And that, I think that also helped us with drugs. Ultimately, basically, this is a big change in mentality. And people in Russia, there was a police almost rebelling against the government. They're writing a open letter and internet campaign to Prime Minister Putin saying, "Look, we want police reform like in Georgia." And organizers of this campaign were arrested, because you cannot refer to an enemy state like a model for any reforms. But obviously they are not the only ones to refer Georgia as a model to reform. Anatoly Chubais indeed said a couple of years ago that we should emanate Georgia's brilliant economic policies, not stupid Venezuela. It's on the economic side. So people do notice those things.
Thank you. I'm watching. You can't see it, but we have in front of us a digital clock here, in big letters. It's 17 minutes and 24 seconds and counting. So we'll be as efficient as we can. We're going to end right on time and get as many of you into the conversation as we can. This gentleman, please.
Good morning, Mr. President. Thank you very much for an incredibly impressive and inspirational presentation. You mentioned Israel as a country you want to model yourself to a certain extent, and Israel has many industries that have become world leaders. What kind of businesses should come to Georgia right now, where you get the intellectual capital that's already there that would help your country grow, and where you could have a competitive advantage in the marketplace in a reasonable period of time?
Well, I mean, as I said, the FDI in Georgia is coming from all different directions in all different fields of economy. This is very remarkable, because people find it an attractive place. As I said, I think the biggest thing is for Georgia is to do financial services. Now, we cannot go through just regular cycles. And like, Eastern Europe, you first get, textile, then you get, first agriculture, and then textile, then, some machine parts, etc. And you go through it, and every time it's a painful change. I think we have to move straight to the stage when we have financial and other services based on regional advantage and the superiority. But there are byproducts, as I mentioned. Georgia that makes business jets. Georgia has all this, the ferroalloy plants, chemical industry, steel industry, we still inherited, and these things are working pretty well now. But I think overall that's what we should be doing. I mean, Israel also benefited greatly from influx of immigrants in the 90s from what was the former Soviet Union. The only country, by the way, to which they're coming back now from Israel is Georgia. We had, I think, I don't know last year's figures, but 2 years ago, it was 650 families that came back, we have excellent relations with them. Except that this is the only point where they don't agree with us. But we don't control it, neither we nor they. They're citizens' choice, obviously. But the point is here that with the time, we are changing. We are now doing, for instance, 1 laptop per child program, giving every first grader a computer from the government. English has become mandatory from this year in every first grade school, and over time that will produce lots of results. But that takes generational change. As I said, at this time we did good stabilization. We will need to have fast progress based on, trading services. We have of course, also to huge transportation system. We have we are the only shortest access point for 6 known countries of Central Asia and Caspian, plus northern China to most of the European destinations. This is a huge extent. And we are using that I think very well right now, and it will expand. Lots of investment in the hydropower sector. We are only using 70% of our hydropower energy, and we are doubling, according to already existing projects, our capacity within the next 5 to 6 years. But I think in parallel, as I'm all obsessed with this idea that we should get innovation, and for that you need to invest in education, and we are doing a lot in that direction now.
Okay. Thank you. Mark, just 1 second. Microphone coming to you. If you could say that again, please.
Mark Hayton, Sidley and Austin. Mr. President, with the displacement caused by the Soviet invasion and the unemployment caused by your reduction in the size of the government, what's happened to the unemployment rate, and also what does the population itself look like? Is it all as youthful as you? You don't have the German problem, let's say, or the Japanese problem.
And I have to teasingly ask, was it a Soviet invasion or a Russian invasion?
Sorry.
But don't be, because it was revealing, perhaps.
No, it was a Soviet invasion, obviously, done by the Russians. Well, I'm very proud that since last 5 years, more people have been coming back to Georgia and living, and we had slight but positive birth balance. This is very important. But of course, we have a problem with population aging, obviously. But still, we're a little bit better off than other places. But there was this strange thing, optimism, which is not bad. I mean, we still have this GDP-PPP ratio, which is like $6,000 something. I think hopefully it will grow again very fast, but it's still, once we get to, I think, to 10,000 altogether, the threat of people, 10, 12,000 living will be removed, and this will be very soon. But we will also become country of immigration. That's my prediction within the next 5, 6, 7 years because of geographic advantages and the things we're saying. But so we'll take people from other countries. But there are also, if you look at the ethnic picture, 5 to 7 million Georgians in Turkey. There's around 1.5 million in Europe, including Russia and Ukraine, a big part of them there. And if you look at capital invested in Georgia, I mean, lots of Georgia expats, Georgians are very successful in those countries are investing, and that's also their vote of confidence in their own country. That, by the way, in that we are luckier. For instance, you mentioned Israel. I mean, until Warren Buffett, few people were investing there. Georgians are investing very heavily in Georgia, and this is another advantage we have. So Yeah, I mean, but aging will remain a problem. And it's also a thing that Caucasus in general in our region people live longer. Japanese are advertising Georgian yogurt as the recipe for living longer. I don't know how good it is though, but that's obvious that also longevity has increased greatly for the last 5 years as well. Mortality rates have been dropping every year. That's quite remarkable.
Sir.
Mr. President, Jim Gansinger, I'm in the fast food business in the R-word country. How did you manage to eliminate corruption in a society where it was so endemic?
Yeah, well, I remember my predecessor saying, corruption is everywhere. Everybody, whole society is corrupt. He said it on the record. He said everybody is corrupt. So, ministers, policemen, school teachers, doctors. It's a nice way to tell yourself there is no use to do anything about it. And by the way, I've heard something like this said by the president of the R-word country now, recently, I think about 6 months ago. And I think it's sad because the point is that first leaders should believe in it. I mean, we had people, I had my friends from Russia who were studying our police reform, and they said, well, and they came in initially and they said, we believe that they thought that there is some blueprint how we can do it, like a scheme, and you just apply it, and then it works. And then after a few weeks, they said, look, it's not going to work with us because the problem is that in our society, people, especially from the elite leadership, do not see their future and their success in their own country. They don't believe in their own country. They don't believe in their long-term future in their own country. They send their kids for education abroad. They try to take out all the money they earn abroad. They try to, their family members, wives and the others, spend most of the time abroad, and they don't build in there. They build in France, in other places all around Europe and sometimes in America. And once you have that situation, that you cannot believe. The problem is it starts from leadership. And I've heard, because corruption obviously in Georgia went down, and this when I talk about like 16, 18, 20-fold increase of tax revenues, this is not the way economy grew. Economy grew nominally 3 times. It grew, it's exactly index of decreased corruption, legalization of economy. Georgia's illegal black economy is maybe 3-4%. In Belgium, it's like 12-14% according to some estimates. So you can compare it. And we had it almost like 80-90%, I think 90 even. So the point here is, you legalize your economy, you cut the government functions. That's the main key to this. I mean, government has to have very little functions, strongly implemented, but little sphere of it. And then then whatever is left, you give them higher salaries. But the main thing you create is climate that it's not done, because it's not acceptable. Because our policemen are not corrupt because not only because they have higher salaries, they look nicer, but they sit in these glass buildings, and it's this thing that they're transparent buildings in the middle of busy neighborhood. There's all young guys and young women at computers, good looking, well dressed. And everybody can step in and everybody can see what they're doing. And that's the thing that, it's a service. Government is a service. You're paid for it. It's not done to do it badly. You are not, people are not obliged to, you are obliged to people. And this mentality is there. But I think some of the people who have seen these figures and still are saying, oh, Georgia has, of course, they no longer have daily corruption in the street, but they have elite corruption. This is the best criticism you can hear. But when you say, what do you mean elite corruption? There is no such thing. They say, oh, there is some corruption behind very high government offices. We don't really see it, cannot be detected in economic figures, but it's there, we know it's there. Excuse me, but once you get it there, you get it everywhere. There is no way you can keep it only there. And vice versa, you cannot eliminate, you cannot eliminate it anywhere until you eliminate it there, and you can first keep it up there clean. And that's political will, and then you apply all the other blueprints. Otherwise, those blueprints simply don't work. And I think, as I said, there is no society that culture is susceptible to corruption. Georgia was deemed to be the most susceptible. It is not. People don't accept it anymore. So, it can be done. It's not, look, they say European, I recently read Khodorkovsky's letter from prison, wherever he is now. And he said, look, in Europe, and he was criticizing European politicians, he said everybody thought that many European politicians were incorruptible, but he said for the reason that nobody tried to corrupt them. It's not that they have cultural aversion towards corruption. Nobody has. You create system, and if you don't have system, they are susceptible to that. And I think America has more or less that system. It's an open country. It's much more flesh, blood, and moving at work. It's much more clean, not compared to Europe. And it has reasons to it. It's not only like, it's not so much culture. Culture comes over time, and it becomes, what we try to achieve in Georgia is to get really to the culture. Maybe there is this magical culture of not being corrupt, maybe. But it takes the generation change to get there. Until then, it's always an uphill battle, always to be very vigilant, always to be checked. Lots of members of my, several members of our majority per parliament were arrested for corruption. The deputy ministers, judges, prosecutors, there are lots of people. We have almost weekly cases of this, but they're getting less and less sums, and basically more and more rare, and that's good.
Mr. President, Georgia has a robust opposition. It's democracy. Sure. And you have your fans and detractors.
Of course.
And some of your opponents say that while it's true that you've done very well in corruption, two institutions of democracy that play a role in curbing corruption, a free competitive press and independent judiciary, have been sorely lacking in respect or reform. How do you counter those charges?
Well, on judiciary, I would agree partly that we are still not there. I mean, we are introducing jury trials this year. The overall confidence, police confidence rate was 5% in 2004. Now it's 86, according to last poll. So policemen are loved. To judiciary, it was 25. I think it's more than 50 now. It's already a big increase, but it's not 86 yet. So it's where we have some time to get there. We made them institution independent. We gave them high salaries. These are young, relatively educated people, more or less, and with ambitions and institutional safeguards of independence. So eventually it will do the trick. But it's a cultural transformation to get independent judiciary. It's not. It's very, very hard. And I think America has achieved it. Very few countries in the world have achieved it, even in Europe. I hope we will achieve it, but it takes time. On press, it's a total bullshit. I mean, usually it's basically it's done for naive foreigners who think it's easy cliche to sell, also for your station, for instance, because usually I hear complaints that there is no freedom of press live on television. Georgia has channels that are more or less sympathetic towards government, tend to be sympathetic, but they have channels that are totally against the government, like hate the government. We have, obviously, but even the sympathetic ones are, say, less sympathetic than the CNN towards, say, Democratic Party. And so, and their printed media is like 95% against the government. Everything is said in Georgia. There are no taboos. There is no libel and defamation laws, and they made no sense anyway in the internet age. And there are no other limitations. And now we have something like C-SPAN, second public channel. There's a main public channel. C-SPAN we have gets exactly, in terms of opinion poll, in terms of people who watch it, I think the same number of people as watch C-SPAN in America, whatever it implies. But everybody has access to Georgia C-SPAN. Every radical group, they can say just whatever. For instance, calls to kill Minister of Interior or to calls to kill President. It's not persecuted. It's said on television. Or to break hand or to cut off head of the president. That's fine. In Georgia, is and we get main public channel which basically has 50% board and opposition, and it's basically the news are under supervision of BBC. They not only monitor it, but they give them advice how to make more impartial. Are they more popular because of that? With all the BBC advice they still get 3% of the audience. With all the balances, and usually every party should get this number of things, and this is all the BBC tells them, and this two should do this and that. Still couldn't get through the 3% audience. Hopefully they will get more, but it takes time. But the problem is with journalistic standards. True.
We need, sadly, this could go on. We need to wrap up. First of all, if you have not been to Georgia, go to Georgia. It is a spectacularly beautiful country. Tbilisi, the capital, is enchanting. It's a city of beauty, of culture, of hospitality, of delicious food, of wonderful wines. That's the first thing. Second thing, Mr. President, a final question. I was there a year and a half ago, had the pleasure and honor of meeting you, and recall, if memory serves me correctly, that when you land in Tbilisi and you get into your car and you drive into the city, you go down an avenue or boulevard named after George W. Street. Not avenue, street. So my question simply is, any thoughts about naming other streets after other presidents?
Ronald Reagan, I would think so. But yeah, even then we had dispute when President Bush came and he had an amazing speech and he had huge audience, 100-something thousand people, very well received. And he was, I mean, I think it was a brilliant exercise of soft diplomacy. He was often blamed for being too brutal, but basically in Georgia he showed a brilliant example of soft diplomacy. But even that, I had an idea and I had an argument with City Council to name street after Reagan, not after Bush, because I thought that's exactly the role model for us to follow it. I still think that. I still believe that he was, for our region, he has done amazing things, and all world for freedom in the world, and he had all the right instincts, and hopefully, I mean, some people are born with instincts, some develop them. He had both. He was born with them and he developed them and over his long life, and hopefully these instincts will live on and will carry on the legacy.
Well, thank you all for coming this morning, Mr. President. Good luck. Thank you very much. Great.
Thank you.